Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's meetup. On the agenda, Scott, Steve, and Allison will be providing us some ArcGIS for local government deployment tips and tricks. Just as a reminder, we'll be recording this meetup and posting it up on meetups.com shortly after the presentation. And during the meetup, if you'd like to make a comment or chat with other participants, feel free to use the chat window. Or if you want to submit a question for the team to answer, feel free to submit them through the Q&A pod. With that said, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Scott.
Thanks, Heather, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about some deployment tips and tricks. Before we get started, though, what I would like to do is just remind everyone that we did have a release earlier in March, right before the Partner Conference and Dev Summit, and I wanted to summarize that real quickly. What you'll find in this March release are a couple key things. One is the first release of our crowdsourcing apps. So we have developed a series of crowdsourcing application templates that are available in ArcGIS Online in the early adopter gallery. And we'd encourage you to check that out if you're looking to deploy some constituent engagement and crowdsourcing workflows in your organization. We also retired a custom iOS application we had for code violation and actually replaced it with a configuration of Collector for ArcGIS to support code violation workflows in your community. So it's a much easier deployment workflow for you if you're looking to address code violation issues in your community. We enhanced the damage assessment solution offering and actually provided an operations dashboard add-in that helps you summarize the results of your damage assessment workflows and provide a simple summary report to FEMA and other agencies that are interested. And then provided a new solution offering in the water utility area that helps with nighttime flow analysis. Then we also made a series of enhancements to the documentation on the solution site, but that's some of the highlights of our March release. But today we're really gathered here today to talk about some deployment tips and tricks and how you can quickly leverage some of the tools we provide with the solution to configure ArcGIS for local government in your organization. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can set up a model organization, deploy the information model, and then turn it over to Steve, who's going to talk about how you can load your content in there, and then Allison will wrap up with how you can configure the maps. Before we get started, though, I just want to talk about some of the configuration patterns we've seen evolve over the last few years, and kind of how you adopt and deploy ArcGIS for local government really depends on a couple key factors. One is your organization moving to COTS and configurable solutions, and do you want to just leverage what's being provided in ArcGIS and kind of move away from custom application development? And that's certainly a trend we've seen in local government over the last few years. Do you have some real demands on your time and need to get something out there quickly and deploy something, in a matter of days and weeks as opposed to months and years as we used to when we were going through traditional requirements gathering and configuration and custom development work? And then ultimately, what kind of technical expertise do you have in your organization? So if you think about those three factors and kind of apply them to ArcGIS for local government, that's really what we're trying to do, is help you address some of those challenges in your organization. And while today we're going to show you kind of some of the underlying information model and how you configure that to get started in your organization, really what you'll do is start your project with some key business requirements, or what workflows do you want to address in your organization, and align them with the maps and apps we provide in the solution, and then ultimately start to think about some configuration patterns that make sense in your organization. And we've seen three patterns really evolve. We have some folks who really take a look at ArcGIS for local government and don't have much in their organization other than kind of a collection of shape files, maybe on a file system, and they've only used ArcGIS to produce maps. And so many of those organizations are really just starting, by completely adopting the solution offering we have and migrating their content into the information model and then quickly configuring and deploying the apps. So that's one configuration pattern we've seen, people that kind of go all in and just completely adopt the system we're providing for your local government. But many of you have mature systems that you've been deploying in your organization to meet specific needs, and you can't really, just kind of pick up those systems and throw them away. And so some individuals and some organizations are actually publishing content to the ArcGIS for local government information model and starting to leverage that content in a whole series of apps that really expand your use of ArcGIS in the organization. And that's a workflow we see in many mature organizations where they set up a publication environment and really push data into that system and then deploy the apps. And then finally, some of you are just using the apps we provide in the solution offering as useful inspirations and taking the code we provide available on GitHub and just customizing it and extending it to meet your specific needs in your organization. And so those are really kind of the three patterns we see within the kind of deployment of ArcGIS for local government. And the thing that I'll point out is that really what we want to encourage you to do is really be very iterative with your implementation. Start with a focused map or app that's available in the solution and kind of learn the pattern and kind of then, work in the next app. So it's a real iterative approach, and that makes it much easier for you to adopt and implement over time. So as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about how you can configure ArcGIS Online and start to take advantage of that in your organization. We're going to talk about how you can deploy and configure the underlying information model we provide with the solution so you can quickly configure and stand up the apps. Steve's going to show you how you can load your authoritative data into that model and start taking advantage of those things. And then Allison will wrap up with some tools we've developed to help you deploy the maps that we provide in the solution in your enterprise environment. And we've got time along the way to take questions. So let me just start with how you can configure ArcGIS Online and really start to take advantage of it in your organization. So ArcGIS Online, if you haven't started using your organization yet, or maybe are just beginning to do that, you'll notice that it really is much like ArcMap and ArcCatalog. It's an empty canvas that you can use to set up and deploy focused maps and focused information for users in your organization. So about a year and a half ago, we developed a model organization to help you get started with that. And that model organization will kind of show you some key patterns on how you set up your organization, create a central set of groups that are required for using ArcGIS Online, and then ultimately, walking you through some workflows to register your content and deploy some focused maps. And that's where you can start to provision the solution offerings we provide in your organization. So let's take a look at what that model organization provides and how you can take advantage of it to configure ArcGIS Online in your organization. So I'm on the solution site, and I'm under your entire organization, because the model organization we've developed is really meant to address many needs in a city or county. And if I, from this location, I can download, and you'll see in a minute what we get. We've also provided a try it live experience for the model organization, so you can come in and see how information products are deployed to different parts of an organization through groups and other ways. And then if I click Learn More here, it's going to take me actually to the documentation that's available for the model organization. And you can see that what we provide is a whole series of icons and documentation that really help you configure your organization and deploy these groups. So as I kind of work my way through this documentation, what you'll see this does is help me set up my subscription. So how do I configure the banner and start to administer my organizational account? Create a set of users for some key roles that'll be necessary in my city or county. And then ultimately start to create a set of groups that are necessary to organize my base maps, a set of featured apps that'll show up in my ArcGIS Online gallery, and ultimately a larger gallery that's available to folks within my entire organization. And so these groups are kind of critical to setting up your organization and really starting to organize information products and content within your organizational account. And then once you set up that organization, you'll see that there's a kind of a key set of groups we've identified for local governments to help you deliver maybe public maps and apps to citizens in your community. And then this public maps and apps group can be wired up to the Maps and Apps Gallery application we provide in ArcGIS Online. If you're starting to take advantage of our ArcGIS Open Data site, you'll know that you'll need a group for your open data content that you can share. And ultimately, there's some other groups that we've identified that are really critical to start sharing information products and other tools across your organization. And those could be a central services catalog and a place for you to share tools and add-ins with knowledge workers in your organization. And then finally, the last thing you'll do is you start to, well, it won't be absolutely the last thing, but one of the next things you'll want to do, I should say, is really start to create a set of functional groups for departments or organizations within your city or county. So for example, if I'm interested in deploying ArcGIS Online for the fire department, you'll see there's a set of groups I can set up for the fire department that really help me organize maps and information products for different parts of that organization. And what we provide are once again, the icons, and you can quickly just take these descriptions and copy and paste them into your organization as you create groups. So think of this as a roadmap or a recipe for configuring your organizational account in a local government. Now, once you get started, you'll see that there's a lot of tools that are out there to help you kind of continue to configure and administer your organizational account. And I just want to point out a couple sites that are important. The first one here is this AGO admin wiki. And what this wiki provides is kind of a portal into a whole series of tools and best practices and other resources that are related to ArcGIS Online and are available and have been developed by members of ArcGIS, of the Esri team and others who are actually contributing to that. So you'll see this is a kind of an inventory of all those tools that are available. And there's a whole set of different tools you may need in your organization to kind of administer content and maybe update tags and other things like that. Well, a few weeks ago, one of our partners, GeoJob, who's actually in the ArcGIS for Local Government Specialty, launched a marketplace application called Admin Tools for ArcGIS. And this is a really interesting set of tools that I would encourage you to take a look at too, because it makes that administration of ArcGIS Online even easier. And if you go to the marketplace and take a look at this tool set, you'll see that there's a video that kind of gives you an overview of what's available. And they've got a really interesting business model here that provides a whole series of functions that you can use to administer your organizational account for free. And then there's some other for-fee functions that are available. So you'll see when you provision this admin tools for ArcGIS Online to your organizational account, that gives you the ability to copy items into, from one part of your organization to another, to move items and reassign ownership, and just do things that those of you that are starting to use ArcGIS Online will know that are kind of cumbersome in the current environment. And so this is a set of tools that I would encourage you to take a look at as well, and really will help increase your use and productivity in ArcGIS Online on a day-to-day basis. So let's come back now. That was a quick overview of how you can quickly, what tools are available to quickly configure ArcGIS Online and to start deploying your organizational account in a meaningful way. Let's go ahead and move on here now and talk about some other things. So the next thing I want to move into is the information model. And there's a lot of questions around now that the assumption is, right, you've identified a set of maps and apps that are important in the solution for your organization. You now want to kind of configure the information model, start loading content in that information model, and then deploying it in your organization. So there's a couple key workflows that we see and kind of hear from users are important to them. One is, what's in this model? How do I understand how it all fits together? How do I configure the schema to meet specific needs in my organization? And as part of that configuration experience, how do I set up the spatial reference and ultimately deploy an empty geodatabase that I'd like to move content into? So what I'd like to show you today is how you can use X-Ray for ArcMap and X-Ray for ArcCatalog to do just that, to kind of work through those kind of key workflows that you'll do early on in your project. So to do that, what I want to do is just start with a real simple use case. One of the more popular solution offerings we provide is this address data management map, and this is an ArcGIS for desktop editing workflow that helps you manage site addresses and address and related center lines and address ranges. So this has got a whole series of layers in this map, and these layers point to a set of features in the local government information model. So how do I, get a good sense for, if I want to set up address data management in my organization, how do I get a good understanding of what content I need to make this map really go? Well, I can use X-Ray for ArcMap to do just that. And when I use X-Ray for ArcMap, what it does is give me a nice report, a whole series of reports actually, that help me understand what's in this map document. So I'm just going to use this add-on and open it up within that address data management map. And you'll see what this does is provide me a whole list of layers that are in the map, which features they're coming from in the underlying information model. I'll also see, are there any fields that are required for either label expressions or perhaps definition queries. And you'll see here that I'm using the road centerline layer and actually doing a definition query to just look for freeways and highways in the organization. So it's a real quick and easy way for me to kind of take a look at the map document that's offered in the solution offering and begin to understand what features in that information model are important to me. So once I understand that, the next thing I may want to do now is actually take a look at the underlying data dictionary that's provided on the solution site for the entire information model. And today I'm going to focus on the specific address features just to kind of illustrate this workflow. So you'll see this data dictionary includes all of the feature data sets, feature classes, and domains and other geodatabase items that are in that model. And I can quickly just drill into a specific layer in the map, or in the geodatabase, I should say, and see quickly, what a definition of that layer, that feature is, what fields are included, the aliases, descriptions, and then any domains that have been set up on individual fields as well too. So it's a real quick, easy way for me to kind of interrogate the content that's in that model and understand, how it's all related to each other. So now that I've kind of taken a look at the data dictionary, or the map document even, started with that map document, I understand what features are needed in that information model, I may want to configure it and extend it to meet specific needs in my organization. So now I'm going to come into ArcCatalog and drill in a little bit deeper and show you how you can do just that. So for the purposes of this illustration, what I've done is I've taken I've used that X-ray for ArcMap document to identify two key feature data sets that are required to stand up the address data management map. One is the address feature data set, which contains the site address points, and the other is reference data, which contains the center lines and some of the other facility sites that are used in that map. And what I'm going to do now is actually just going to use X-ray for geodatabases to begin to configure that information model and set the spatial reference. So let's do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just select that geodatabase I set up with just the content that I'm interested in, and I'm going to actually export it to an XML workspace document. So what's important to note is that X-ray works with the XML workspace document, so you always have to kind of go from a geodatabase format to XML and then begin to use that to actually work with the content. So there's a lot of things you can do with X-ray. It's kind of like a design tool for geodatabases, and I'm just going to show you a couple key workflows today. The first thing I'm going to do is open up all of the data sets that are in my address geodatabase, and what this is going to do now is take all the feature classes and other data types that are in that XML workspace document and present it to me in an Excel spreadsheet here. Come on. And when it does that, it's going to open it up. You'll see in Excel, and I'm probably going to get two of them now here because I wasn't patient. Yep, so what it's got, yep, as I said, I wasn't patient enough, so let's go ahead and cancel that and kill one. You'll see that what it's done here is actually opened up and presented for me all of that content in that information model, and I can interact with it as a series of spreadsheets. So let's come on over here, and what I'm going to do just to kind of illustrate this workflow is just work with the site address points. So I come over here, and I've got the site address point feature class. I can see all of that content that I was interacting with in the data dictionary is now available to me in a simple spreadsheet that I can modify. So let's just go ahead and add a few fields that are missing from this model that I'll need in my organization. So I'm just going to go in and add a few rows, and I'm going to quickly go in here and add two things. I'm going to add a law boundary because I want to know which kind of patrol boundary each of these addresses are in, and also a fire district as well too, just to illustrate this. And with Excel, I can quickly just copy these rows then, and then just modify them. So I'll just go ahead and do that real quick to get me started. Update the description. So this is the address resides in. Update the alias. And do the same thing then real quickly for the fire district as well too, just to show how we can do that quickly, and then just update this. So what have I done here? I've opened up the XML workspace document. I've added a few fields. I could configure the aliases on some other fields to make them to use terms that matter more specifically to my organization. But I'm just going to go ahead and save this now and close that, and then save the work I did on that XML workspace document. So that's a real simple example of how you can use X-ray to quickly just go in, open up a very specific focus part of that information model, and then make some changes to it as well. So the last thing I may want to do before I kind of move on is I want to set the spatial reference for that. So the data that we provide with the solution offerings in Naperville, Illinois, but obviously you're going to want to deploy this in your local spatial reference. So I've got a geodatabase here actually that represents that has some content in it that's set in my spatial reference. So I can just select a feature data set with the appropriate spatial reference and then use one of the tools in X-ray that says use spatial reference and then save that again. And ultimately what it's going to do now is essentially take the spatial reference properties that are on current data I have in my organization and apply it to this XML workspace document. And then the last thing I may want to do is now take this address XML document, create a new geodatabase, and then import that. And what you'll see in a second here is that I've got a new empty geodatabase in my spatial reference with the fields that I've created and added through that design process. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. You can see here in my site address layers, if I just quickly look at those fields, I've got my law boundary fire district, and all of that information is in the local spatial reference that I set for Michigan South Plains. So real simple, real straightforward way for me to configure that information model, add a few fields, and then quickly deploy it in my spatial reference. So the last thing I want to show you, then let's go back to the PowerPoint here, is now that I've kind of configured that information model, I've deployed the maps and apps in my organization, I'm using address data management on a day-to-day basis. Esri comes out with a new version of the information model, and I want to actually go through a process to take the changes that Esri's provided in the next release and apply them to my information model maybe and start to take advantage of additional content that's there. So about a year ago, we provided a new tool that's called the Schema Migration Wizard, and this tool is really designed to help you do just that. It allows you to kind of take your schema, compare it to what we provide in the solution, and then create a new schema for you to deploy. So let's take a look at that, and I'll show you kind of some of the key workflows for that. So this is a tool that you can download from the solution site. It's available directly from the solution site, and what I typically encourage everyone to do is really start with the release notes that we provide with the solution, because this is a full, this will give you a real comprehensive overview of all of the changes that we're providing to the information model. And you'll see with each subsequent release what are the specific areas we changed in the model. Did we add things, remove things, restructure things? All of that will be documented in the release notes. But what I want to do now is kind of walk you through how you can use the Schema Migration Wizard now to create a new information model. So you'll see that this tool, when I open it up, gives me the opportunity to kind of compare my current geodatabase to a whole series of solution offerings that we have. So let's just take you through that. I'm going to go ahead and select my current address schema. We'll just assume that addresses are the only thing I'm using. And one of the key decisions you have to make is, what do I want to do? Do I want to keep the content that I've configured as is and not disturb it? And we assume that's the case because you've gone through some configuration process. Or do I want to take content that's in the local government model and essentially replace what I've already done in my organization? So that's a key decision you'll have to think about really right up front. Once I make that decision, what you'll see here is it's going to go through and analyze the differences between what we provide in the solution information model and what you have in your current geodatabase, and give me a set of decisions. And this usually takes a couple seconds because the information model that we provide, the ArcGIS for Local Government information model is pretty big. There's over 300 features in it, and it takes just a few seconds here to kind of run through, do that analysis, and give you the options that are necessary. So once it's done, you'll see it presents you with a decision matrix, and it allows you to go in and individually select features you may want to add that are in the solution model that aren't in your model. Keep things that I already had in my model. In this case, you can see it's all of the address content and some of the content in the reference data feature data set. It'll also give you the opportunity to update things where there may be duplicates. So if I chose that, to update and maybe add domain values, I can do that. And then finally remove anything you may want to. When it's all done, it'll give you a summary report that shows you what you may want to add. It'll give you the opportunity then to save that as a new geodatabase, or I'm sorry, a new XML workspace document. And then when, it'll just write that and you can then begin to import that. So for the sake of time, I did that ahead of time. And let's go take a look at what I'm left with here. So here is that XML workspace document that represents the merger of those two data sets. And ultimately, when I bring it into a geodatabase, a new local government geodatabase, you'll see I've got my address content that I started with and everything else that was in the underlying local government model in the December release. And if I go into my individual site address layer that I had created and modified a few minutes ago, you'll see that the content that I configured has been preserved. So I don't lose any of those edits that I'm making over time, and I can incrementally apply changes as we go. So that was a quick overview of how you can use the Schema Migration Wizard to incrementally stay current with the information model changes. And I showed you an example of how I could apply essentially and add all of the additional ArcGIS for local government content, but you could be much more systematic. You could just pick specific themes and add content. Maybe you wanted to do special event planning after you did address data management. You could just apply those features that are relevant to special event planning. So let me stop there, and what I want to do now is turn it over to Steve, and Steve's going to show you how you can start to load your content into the information model. And Heather, maybe if we have a few questions while we're transitioning over to Steve, while I stop sharing he starts, we can take them now if we want.
Sure. Joshua asks, is there a one-stop shop location to batch download all of the latest recommended local government tools and add-ins?
So that's a good question. On the actual solution site, if you go to the information model, I'll try to show this at the end. If you go to the information model page, you'll see on the right-hand side we've got links to all the tools we're showing you today, maybe aside from Gazinta, but we can certainly add that one as well too. So at the end, I'll come back and show you that.
And Nancy asks, is the data in the new geodatabase?
No, it's a schema.
No?
So I'm working with schemas, so we have to reload the data, and that's why some of the stuff Steve's going to show here in a second is critical, because you're still working with empty schemas and just modifying those schemas.
And that's it so far.
Okay. Steve, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, that's good. So, well, thanks, Scott. And I've been working on this Gazinta idea. If you haven't heard about this before, the basic idea is this Gazinta that. There's lots of complicated things we need to do with data and things that need to be moved around. And I've been working on some ways of simplifying this and making it relatively straightforward for people. And I do a lot of this kind of work on projects, and I'll talk about a few of these examples today. So today we'll just talk about a few ways of doing this. So the first one I'm going to talk to is sort of picking up where Scott left off, where I've got an updated data model. And basically, with that new data model, I want to take everything I had in my existing database and push it into the new data model. And if you've done this before and you might have 150 feature classes loaded, it can be very time-consuming to even figure out how to do all this, and Gazinta makes that pretty easy. The second one I'll talk about is just the sort of conversion to local government model. So you might do this once or ongoing, like Scott talked about earlier in the patterns, but I'll talk about a specific example from Simi Valley in California that I worked on about a year ago. So in the first case, if you just go and look in ArcMap, I've got some in what I had in my 10.2 database, basically looking at the information model here, East Wilmot Street, when it was updated, a few other things. And maybe in this data model, we might even have deleted more fields, but it doesn't really hurt to have blank fields in here. But this is basically the content that we had in the existing model. And now I have my new 10.3 model. And like Scott did, normally the case when you run through that Schema Migration Wizard, if you've played with the addresses or you've set them up or you've done the addressing project, probably when you run the wizard, you're not going to touch anything there. So now I've got this empty database and I just want to append two things. So one of the tools that is there, and it's just an ArcGIS geoprocessing tool, right, written in ArcPy, but it gives you the ability to say, here's the source workspace, my local government database, and here's my new 10.3 database, and just append everything. Now, if I don't give it this last parameter, it'll just look for matching feature class names and it'll load everything. But in this case, I've given it a playlist. So one of the things you can do here is you can give it a data set like site address points, or you can give it a playlist which might include everything that's address related and run that through. So basically, this will run pretty quickly because I've got a pretty small sample data set. But basically, all this tool does is it runs through and it runs a delete rows on the existing 10.3 database, and then it runs an append when that's done. Makes this whole process a lot simpler. If I turn these guys on, you'll see that I've got that same information now in my 10.3 model, and you see they're basically exactly the same. So that's pretty straightforward and pretty simple to do. A lot of times, though, we want to do something a little bit more than that, and maybe one good way to look at this is to go back to the source data, and this is where we started on the Simi Valley project. Typical of data that's been through shape files, the field names are truncated. The values are pretty much what we need, but the field names are all different. And Gazinta, a lot of what goes on in these Gazinta tools is we've made it really hard to move these things with simple data loader or with other tools that people have. Usually the content in both data models is almost the same. It's just the field names are different typically. So Gazinta makes this simple stuff easy, but also works with all the other tools if you have to do something more complex as well. So what we did on the Simi Valley project is this is our starting point, and it was more than just addresses. When we started on this project, we actually were working on moving the whole existing database from the city into the local government model. You might just choose parts and pieces on your project for specific applications, but what Aaron Russell, the city, wanted to do is get everything they had, move it to local government one time, and then they could take advantage of all the applications with ArcGIS for local government. And so we worked through a process, and this spreadsheet-based approach is fairly simple, but it works pretty nicely. We just basically looked at the existing data sets. We were looking at what was the target database and data set and just made some notes. Sometimes there was no exact home in the information model, so we just copied stuff. But other times we were doing more ETL work, and if we get down to addresses here, we basically were going to go from there was a sort of point address shape file we started with, really, and we're going to site address points. We were going to ETL it. And, you know, the note here is just there was a pretty good match on values, but we'll need to do a little bit of work with that. So the way that this works from the Gazinta side, like, of course, you could go through and write some custom tools or sort of treat this as a one-off thing. But what Gazinta does, it makes it kind of easy for you to set things up and to have some fairly consistent tools and just focus on the challenges of getting the model together. So one of the things you can do is the Gazinta is based on XML files as the way to do the configuration. So going from addresses to site address point, we can create one of these XML files. And what I'm going to do here is also go and use the Gazinta Field Mapper online. I know some people are fond of XML and like doing that sort of thing, but a lot of other people, especially in the early stages, it turns out it's pretty handy to use the Gazinta.com website. And what happens on here is it will give me a more visual way of looking at these things. So for example, the target field is site address ID. This source field was the element key field. And one of the things you can do with Gazinta, in addition to the mapping of these things, you can also specify some QA rules. And part of Gazinta includes some basic QA on the processing and on the results of things. In this case, we're just going to copy, and a number of these ones we don't really have a source for. You can also do some more advanced things, like here, on the full name, there wasn't really a source full name field, so we're taking the street direction, the name, the type, and stripping off any extra spaces in there in this case. A few default values and things. This isn't really, what I'm doing here really isn't a USNG chord. It's actually doing a Python calculate, which is, in addition to being able to enter a simple expression like here, you can also do something more complex, like use the mygazinta.py library that's included with this. And it has a couple of tools built in, like get the database time or get the default username, that sort of thing is there. But it also has the ability to write your own functions. And very straightforward, but what this one does, this get WS84, is it basically finds the feature in the spatial reference 4326, or basically WS84, and returns the point.x value inside of this. So you can do some pretty amazing things in here, in addition to basic things like just getting the time or setting a default username and that sort of thing using my Gazinta So it's fairly simple, the user interface. A lot of times I lay this out and just get my bearings and sort of think through how I'm going to put this together and then go off and actually do the details or figure out how to do the implementation of the code later on. The one thing that isn't shown here is there's also a way to do value maps. So typically the way what you would use this for, it would be to map your road classes on street center lines to the local government road classes. Those sorts of things is typically the kind of things that you would do there. So once you get that set up and get that going, that's sort of a one-time activity. It's a little bit heavy duty to do that part of it, but once you have it together, then it's fairly easy to do. Almost every Gazinta load process really has kind of an extract, a field calculator, a QA step, and then finally a step to load to the target data model. And in this case, once we have that together, we can call that run all model a number of times. And basically, in this case, what we're going to do is run through. First step is to delete any existing site addresses. Then we're going to come through and do that run all model. So there's several steps. The first one is extract out to an intermediate file geodatabase. In this case, just the first 1,000 rows are coming out. Now in that intermediate database, it's adding the fields that are required for the target model, and that's what we're going to calculate into. Now it's doing the actual calculations, so those things like the username and copying the values and things. Next, it's running the QA, so it'll actually do a check geometry, which makes sure it'll go to SDE. It'll also do that thing to make sure that all the address IDs are unique in the source database. And if everything works okay, it's basically going to delete the rows in the local government model, and it's going to do the update on that. And if we go back to ArcMap now, the end result of all that is probably not that exciting because it looks pretty much like it did before. The only really visible piece of that is that now it's going to be updated. I'm on Eastern time, so that'll be updated to be the current date and time, and my operating system username on this machine has been inserted there. So that's the basics of the tools. There's a bunch more to it, but these are sort of two common ways that people would end up using the Gazinta tools. There are these downloads. If you're using Gazinta a fair bit, I'd really strongly suggest that you hook up on GitHub and synchronize changes once in a while with what's going on there. When you download from Gazinta.com, and I do ask you to register there just to keep track of things, and basically you'll get access to this Gazintaville example, which has a more complete example with a number of the common data sets and some of the tips and tricks like using a text parcel layer with a join in it to grab the assessment information and push that into a publishing model. There's some pretty neat examples in there. And that's on the Gazinta.com site with all the data and things. And there's pretty good documentation on the Gazinta site as well. So here's a better or more full description of all the toolboxes. So there's a Gazinta toolbox, and here's the packages inside of there, the extracting of CAD, layer files, and workspaces. If you have the data interop extension, anything that data interop will read will be treated as and useful as a workspace. So I've used it a lot to pull for map info and other sources to get it to local government model, for example. The transform is really the calculate and source target QA piece. The load is got several different things to it. I showed you the replace rows a couple times, but you could also just delete all the rows in a database or append all the rows from database. You can even just add the missing fields based on the config, which is sometimes useful to do to the target data model. And you can also do a more advanced thing with replacing by field value. So you might be able to replace all the towns in a county or all the counties in a state, let's say. You can do those sorts of things, or all the floors in a building is another example. And then there's the setup tools that go along with it there. And so they're just, again, they're just geoprocessing tools that have been built using ArcPy and pretty straightforward to use in your own geoprocessing models. And of course, they're all scriptable as well. The tools are free, so you can get it from those locations. It's just a share-alike license, which means if you use it, please make your stuff free too. And again, there's the reference to the places that you can grab things. Again, if you haven't been using GitHub and you're, think it's something weird, once you get GitHub for Windows, you'll never go back. It's actually a really handy and very useful thing to use. So that's it for me.
Hey, Steve, one question that came in.
Yeah.
So you've been doing a lot of work in actually you do a lot of work with FME and data interop too. Could you just, one of the questions we had is kind of how does the Gazinta stuff compare to data interop and FME, and when do you, in the projects you do, when do you just, when do you use Gazinta versus FME? Maybe is a good way to characterize it, kind of the use cases.
Yeah, sure. I think there's definitely a number of different cases, and the thing, I know people find this a little bit confusing, but there's also a Gazinta version 4 FME, so you can basically take these same XML mapping files and these same techniques for QA, and there's some tools that you can use inside of FME to do those same steps. And I suppose for me, the thing is that after doing a lot of this data loading work all over the place, I realized that most of my scripts or most of my geoprocessing models or most of my FME workbench tools were sort of add field, manipulating basic things like changing ST name to street name and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it really complicates the models overall. So my philosophy both in the ArcPy world and also in the FME world is to push down all that attribute handling into some underlying Python scripts and XML files as a way to handle that piece of it. So in some senses for me, it doesn't really make that much of a difference really, right? Because you could do it either way. And for me, as a person who does a heck of a lot of work like this, I end up doing more of this stuff in FME. And the primary reason I do it in FME, especially for larger data sets, is that inside of the ArcGIS desktop world, we end up creating this intermediate Gazinta geodatabase. So we have to read everything, we have to write everything, we have to then read it again and write everything again. Imagine in the FME world, there is no intermediate database. It's all in memory. So we only read once and write once, right? So typically things that might take a minute to run in the ArcGIS desktop world might run in 10 or 15 seconds just through FME. And I think that's the biggest distinction, right, in terms of when I would switch from one to the other. Fiddling around with small data sets and getting it set up, fine to use the desktop. But when you really get into large data sets, and especially for more complex things than just pushing addresses from one model to another, that you might have to do more regular, FME's got a lot more power for some of those things. And generally, it's just a lot faster.
Okay, good. That helps a lot.
So I guess we'll just switch over to Heather then if we...
Yeah, or Allison, why don't you go ahead?
Or is it Allison? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm next. Okay. So a lot of the solutions that we deliver come with a file geodatabase and a bunch of map documents that are tied to a file geodatabase structure. And so far today, you've seen a lot of ways of moving around inside those databases and creating new ones that work with your schema. But you're still left with these map documents that are tied to a file geodatabase schema. In things like the data sources for layers or in the label expressions and definition queries, there's different ways of referencing field names and geometry fields, especially between different database types. So resourcing and resetting all of those can be quite time-consuming, so we have a tool that will help you do that. This is the Set Map Data Sources tool. It's a GP tool that I'll show you in a moment, and it's available on ArcGIS Online. I will give you guys the URL for that is over in the chat window if you're interested. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this. Instead, I'm just going to show it to you. So here I have the general purpose base map that we deliver. It has, as you can see, a lot of layers, and many of these layers have, have definition queries on them. For example, this one here has a geometry. It's only showing fields over a certain area, and there's another field name there. You'll notice that the field names are in quotes because this is currently pointing to a file geodatabase. There may also be places, if there was a labeling on this layer, where there would be a VB expression set up pointing to which features should be labeled and how. And that would also be using a file geodatabase syntax. So now let's take this map document and make it work against an SDE. So I'm going to close this to avoid any locking issues and bring up ArcCatalog. So I'm in the same location. Here's the map document I was just showing you, and here's the database that map document is currently sourced to. And I've downloaded those productivity tools that set map data sources from ArcGIS Online, and I have it all ready to go. I've also set up all of my data already in an SDE. So you can see under database servers here, I have this meetup database that's all set up, and the structure of all of the feature classes in here matches the structure that is currently being used by the general purpose MXD from this local government GDB. I've also created a database connection from this database server. If you've never done that before, it's a right click and save connection. And the reason I'm doing that is this set map data sources tool needs a connection file as input. So let's go ahead and run this tool on that general purpose map doc. I can drag in the MXD, and I can drag in the geodatabase that's the current source for that MXD. And next it's going to ask me for the new source. So where do I want to resource all of that content to? And I could just drag and drop the meetup in here, but that's actually not going to work. The tool won't run against a dragged in SDE connection file. You'll see it's a partial file path. It doesn't go all the way back to the root. Instead of using that, I'm going to come in here to my user profile, app data, roaming, and I'm going to paste that whole file path into the chat window for you while this tool runs. And I'm going to choose my saved connection file, and when I add it, you'll see now it's got a full path. So that's what the tool needs to run. And then I have three options for what changes I would like to see in the map document. So I want it to update all of the layer sources to point to the new SDE database. I also want it to update the syntax in my definition queries and the syntax in all of my label definitions. So I'll say OK, and that's going to run. And while it runs, I'm going to paste in the path for that database connection files. So it just takes a few seconds here to run. It's going through and it's updating all of the sources of all of the layers in that map document. It's going to remove the quotes from the field names and also update the geometry field syntax to match what's expected in an SDE database. And it's doing the same thing anywhere there's a label definition that's been set. And it's going a little slower than normal because I have Adobe Connect running. I'm sorry. It was running in about 20 seconds earlier. While we're waiting, I see that Lauren has asked a question if these tools will all work in 10.2.2 as well. This tool will run in 10.2 and 10.3. Scott? Yes, says that they'll all work in 10.2.
Doesn't like your meetup.
It doesn't like the meetup, no. I forgot how much Adobe slowed my computer down.
Yeah.
I even half the size of the MXD. There we go. It runs much faster if you're not currently in an Adobe Connect session, I promise. Regardless, that's still less than a minute and a half, and updating all of those layers manually certainly would have taken longer than that. So I'll close that and come back into ArcMap. I'm just going to refresh my folder here so it brings in the new map doc. And you'll see what's happened is it's actually created a new MXD. So here's the original MXD. Nothing has been changed in that. But it's created a new map document for me with everything updated in it.
Come on, ArcMap.
Yep. If anybody has any questions, you can type them in. Matt, I pasted the link to these tools a few messages up in the chat window. It's the arcgis.com link.
You can also get them directly, Matt, off the local government information model site, too, in the help.
Yep. There's a whole topic in there on running these tools that goes through the workflow I'm showing. Okay, so here comes the data. So here's my updated general purpose base map. We can come back in here and look at that facility site layer again. And if we look at the source, it's now pointing at the SDE feature class. And if we look at the definition query, you can see that instead of, I believe it's shape underscore area in quotes, it's now shape dot area, and the quotes have been removed from that field name and also FC code. So it's now compatible with an SDE database.
So it's really that simple. For a minute and a half's worth of work, I've saved myself a lot of tedious going in here and resetting everything. And then if you make a mistake, you got to go back and find it again. So, yeah, that tool is available off of ArcGIS.com. Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Okay, let me just kind of wrap up, and then we can take some more questions. Allison, there was some questions, and I forget the answer to that will work with any enterprise geodatabase, right? Did we tackle all? Just remind me again which database types
We tackled all the
that?
major ones. I just showed that using an SQL Express Workgroup database. I know I tested it in an Oracle, and three or
SQL
four
Server as
others.
well too, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, SQL Server. I don't remember the others, but we tested it against all of the major ones that are out there being used by people today.
Okay, great.
Everything
so let me
that
just summarize.
supports.
Yep. No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just said everything that ArcMap supports was supported by that tool.
Okay, great. So let me just summarize, you guys, and then we can take some more questions as well too. So, you know, we showed you today several tools that can help you guys really leverage some of the kind of underlying information model and model organizational content we provide in the solution, and then tools to kind of quickly configure it in your organization. And as we mentioned early on, obviously, you know, while we talked a lot today about kind of the guts of the solution offering that are provided, we really want you to focus on, you know, kind of the maps and apps that we provide in the solution and use that to kind of lead you into the technology. You know, we showed you how you can kind of take and configure the information model, compare that to your current data holdings, and then migrate content into it with a set of freely available tools. Ultimately, you know, you can configure kind of this information model and kind of the tools quickly to meet your specific data holdings, and customize the apps if you need to. But a lot of that work can be done at kind of the map and the information model layer level, I should say, with field aliases and additional fields themselves. And we would always encourage you to ask for help. You know, Steve's been doing a lot of this work, and you can, you know, get a hold of him as you're using those Gazinta tools. We've got some other folks that obviously can help with things in X-ray and just how to, you know, good patterns for kind of configuring and extending the information model so you can take advantage of all the solution offerings we're providing. And we went through a lot of different tools today, and in this, if you Google these, you can find the URLs, and we provided you some of the URLs in the chat window. I also mentioned that they are available, most of these are available right from the information model page on the help system, and we'll get Gazinta up there as well too. We need to get a link to that as well. And you can find the tools that GeoJove, our partner, has built, you know, right there in the ArcGIS marketplace. But a good Google search on any of these things will quickly, you know, bring those to light for you. So with that, Heather, I think we're all set with kind of the presentation, and certainly we can take some more questions that have come in, and let's just go ahead and address those if you don't mind.
Sure. I think this is a question for Steve. Nancy asked, is the value map matching the domains from the existing data to the local government information model domains?
Yeah, typically what it does is it's just a list of source values and then the target values, and typically it's sort of one domain to another or one set of values to another, or, you know, for example, one example for me was we had a database where the city names from the sources were all 3-character abbreviations, but in the local government model, we wanted them to be the full, you know, proper case names of the cities that we were loading into a regional database. And so that we just used the value map from things like Watt to Waterloo, you know, and that's basically what it does.
Great. I think this might be a question for you, Scott, from Charlene. Okay. Well, actually, it's just a comment about a webinar, how to use the attribute assistant and the dynamic value table.
Yeah. So we did one, I think, Allison, with you and Mike did that. Was that a year ago now, probably? We did a meetup on that topic, and you can find the video on the meetup site, Charlene. So that was a pretty popular one, and we did that, and maybe we'll think about doing one of those later this year as well too. But there's definitely some content on the meetup site now. If you go into the videos page, you'll find the recording from that.
There's a question from Joshua. Is there any white papers or other resources available that covers and provides details about basically everything that we've shown? It might be good to go over where you can get everything that we've shown today.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I didn't do that. I should do that. So I'm on the solution site, and I'm on the information model help page. And you'll see here on the right-hand side, there's links to the schema migration wizard that we showed, both of the X-ray add-ins, and then if you start to dig in deeper to some of the workflows and then get started, you'll see that the set map data sources tool that Allison showed you is available here on the site as well too. So all of that, we tried to kind of provide those tools in the context of a workflow. So you'll also see then there's some documentation that walks you through how to use the schema migration wizard that I showed you today in a high level. There's also some workflow here to how do I import that XML workspace document and set the spatial reference that I showed you. So all of that documentation we try to provide here on this information model page. And then some of the content that I talked about for the model organization is available on that help topic as well too. And we'll also get a link to the Gazinta tools on here as well in our next release. That's something we haven't done yet, and we'll do that for sure. But if you come to this page, you'll find most of the content that's available that we showed you today.
Charlene had a question. Does the schema migrator migrate the records from in the attribute assistant and dynamic value tables? I'm assuming so.
Well, it doesn't move content. So the schema migration wizard is actually working with your database schema, not the content. But the tools that Steve showed, that would certainly do it. The append tools, if you had an existing dynamic value table in there and generate ID, it would move that content over for you.
There's no other questions.
There was the recent one there about voiding records in the attribute system tables. Yeah, so anything that goes through X-ray, you're going to lose all the rows in the tables when you re-import that thing, so you'd have to pull the data in separately. Yeah.
Right.
And also, how do we access help if needed?
For which?
I think for everything, it sounds like.
Well, most of the help for Steve, you've got videos and stuff on Gazinta on the site, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, so some of it's there on gazinta.com, and then the rest of the content we try to make available here on the solution site.
And we're all findable on the web, right? It's not too hard. You can ask a question through the Gazinta site, or you can get on the forums too, right? It's a good way to get feedback from people too.
For sure, for sure. Even on the Meetup site, we'll get it to you as well. Yep.
I think that's it. So I'll just wrap up. If there's any questions, feel free to submit them. So thanks everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing and hearing from you at our next meetup, which is on April 23rd. So we'll be providing an overview of planning and economic development maps and applications. So until then, have a good afternoon. I think there's one last question. What would you suggest for a first try at the local government information model?
Yeah, I guess I would go back to that comment in the beginning. I'd start with a specific map or application in the solution that you want to deploy in your organization. That's the easiest way to really get started. Just pick one, pick one that aligns with the work you need to do in your organization and the kind of services you're trying to deliver, and go from there.
Great. Well, thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks everyone. Talk to you soon.